My name is Amy Snider, and I'm 27 years old. I live with my parents, and we've always been a tight-knit trio throughout my childhood. I've always looked up to my dad, who embodies hard work. He runs a thriving business, though his long hours keep him away from home. Whenever he does have a break, he devotes it to me. On his days off, he makes an effort to spend time with me, showing what a great father he is. My mom, on the other hand, presents a different reality. She's never worked a day in her life and has never shown interest in supporting my dad's business or pursuing any career outside of the home. While we've always had a comfortable lifestyle, with my mom frequently attending social events, I often felt a sense of neglect from her. I experienced many moments of loneliness, but my dad's consistent presence made sure I never truly felt alone. As I grew older, I noticed my mother's tendency to break promises. While my dad always followed through on his commitments, my mom's promises often fell flat, leaving me disillusioned. I eventually learned not to take her words seriously. While my dad's reliability earned my deep respect, I even thought about working alongside him in his company after I graduated, seeing it as a way to honor him and keep his work going. In my early 20s, my father and I began having more meaningful conversations during our outings for drinks. Meanwhile, my mother's role in my life remained distant and superficial. The only time she intervened was when I expressed my desire to join my father's company. "Dad, I want to work for your company after I graduate. I'm already preparing for it. I want to follow your path," I told him excitedly. "Amy, are you sure about that? A girl doesn't need to do that kind of work," my mom interrupted, her words steeped in traditional views. "Why not? I want to work hard just like Dad," I replied. "A woman should find a good husband who will provide for her," she countered, reinforcing old-fashioned expectations. Disappointed by her lack of understanding, I chose not to argue further. I had no intention of living a life driven by someone else's expectations, especially not following in my mother's footsteps. I had always dreamed of becoming an independent woman, and I intended to do so during my college years. From that point, I focused on my studies with the goal of joining my dad's company as soon as I graduated. Though my mother was skeptical, she eventually seemed to accept my decision. "If that's what you want, then do it. But don't say I didn't warn you about the consequences," she remarked in resignation. "If you can handle it, then go ahead." So, I followed through, stepping into my father's company, which only seemed to widen the gap between my mother and me. On the other hand, my bond with my father deepened as we spent more time together. Looking back now, I can see that my mother wasn't thrilled about how things unfolded. When I joined the company, my dad invested a lot of time in training me, though I didn't know it at the time. His health was rapidly declining. It took him months to teach me the ins and outs of the business, and then he collapsed at work one day and was rushed to the hospital. Over the next 5 years, he fought bravely against his illness. "Amy, how's the company holding up without your dad?" my mom asked, though her concern was laced with doubt. "It's tough, but everyone's supporting me. Dad made sure I had everything I needed," I answered confidently. "Well, just make sure you don't let it fall apart. As the next generation, you're responsible now," she cautioned. "You don't really care about the company. You're just trying to impress others." Her lack of faith stung. During my father's illness, we had many disagreements. Despite his weakening condition, he would visit the company now and then, emphasizing its importance to him. "These employees and this business are precious to me, but I have to let go," he confessed one day, his voice thick with emotion. "Amy, I've seen how much you care. I trust you to take care of them. I don't know if I can be like you, Dad, but I'll do my best to keep your legacy alive," I promised. From that moment, I took on the leadership role. With my father mostly in the hospital, I spent all my time running the company, leaving little room for anything else. I visited him regularly, fitting it into my hectic schedule. My mom, on the other hand, barely managed the basics, like bringing him clean clothes. Even that seemed to bother her. I couldn't help but wonder about her feelings toward my father. Did she not feel any gratitude or sympathy for his illness? The thought saddened me, especially when I thought about all my father had done for me while my mother remained distant. Despite my exhaustion, I made every effort to visit him as often as possible. After a year, he peacefully passed away in his sleep. In the whirlwind of tasks that followed, I barely had time to grieve. My mother, seemingly oblivious to my emotional state, expected me to handle everything, from funeral arrangements to hospital paperwork. I knew I couldn't rely on her for support. She had never stepped outside of her comfort zone at home. So, I quietly took charge of everything. The day after the funeral, my mother finally spoke up. "Amy, now that the funeral is over, are you all settled now?" she asked with an air of finality. I faced the situation head-on. "It's time for you to leave. I've inherited 200 million yen, and I have no need for you anymore. Thank you," she said flatly, as though it were a mere formality. Her words stung, but I had expected them. There was no point in arguing. Did she really believe that money could replace family? With so many questions swirling in my mind, I made my decision. The next day, I made arrangements to sell everything connected to me, leaving my mother stunned by how quickly I was leaving. I had prepared for this moment, but I kept one secret from her. Despite her claim of inheriting 200 million yen, my father had entrusted all the finances to me, naming me as the sole heir. Not a penny remained for my mother, a choice my father made while he was still well. "Your mother doesn't understand money management or wise spending. You'll need to give her monthly allowances," he had told me. "If she gets a lump sum, she'll waste it all. If she complains, don't give her a dime." Though he said it in jest, he also handed me an SD card with a video message for my mother. I never imagined I'd have to show it to her, but given recent events, it seemed that moment might come sooner than I expected. After I left, I figured my mother would eventually contact me, but it happened sooner than I thought. "Come home right now," she demanded over the phone. "I'm at work, Mom." "What's going on?" I replied, irritation creeping into my voice. "I need to talk to you. Come home, please," she insisted. With a heavy sigh, I reluctantly returned to our family home, SD card in hand. As soon as she saw me, she began to accuse me. "You took all of your father's inheritance, didn't you? I sensed something was wrong the moment you left so suddenly. Give me your father's inheritance now," she commanded, her voice dripping with greed. "How can you be so selfish? You can't even handle being a mother," I shot back, frustration boiling inside me. Without saying a word, I handed her the SD card. She looked at it, puzzled. "What's this?" she asked. "You probably don't even know how to watch this," I said, hiding my disappointment. I grabbed my laptop, inserted the card, and played the video. There was my father, as full of life as I remembered him. I couldn't help but wonder how my mother would react to his video message. Quietly, I left the room, leaving her to watch alone. I had never seen my mother go against my father, but now, after his passing, would his words have an impact? When I returned, I found her in tears. I was stunned, my mother crying over a video from my late father. I was curious about the video's contents but hesitated to watch it myself. So, I remained in the dark about why she was so upset. "Mom, are you all right?" I asked, my voice laced with concern. "I'm okay, I understand now. I'll honor your father's wishes and leave everything to you. Go home for now. Call me after you've had a moment to gather yourself," she said quietly, her tone heavy with emotion. Sensing she needed space, I left, lost in thought about how my father had managed to silence my mother. Questions swirled in my mind as I made my way home. Nearly a month passed with no word from her, and I began to worry. During my lunch break, I decided to check on her at my parents' house, but she wasn't there. Later that evening, I went back, relieved to see the lights on. "Sorry for showing up unannounced. I stopped by this afternoon, but you weren't home, and I got worried," I explained when I saw her. "I was at my part-time job today," she replied. "A part-time job?" I asked, shocked. My mother had always been against working. What had changed? "Didn't you watch that video? It was a message for you," she answered. "You should take it home and watch it too," she added. "Amy, can I watch it?" I asked, offering the SD card to her. "All right," she agreed, handing it back to me. Feeling uneasy, I returned to the office and sat at my father's desk. I took a deep breath and played the video. "Sweetheart, if you're watching this, it means you've been unable to talk to Amy. First, I want to thank you for helping me raise Amy all these years. Without you, I couldn't have managed the company and taken care of her." My father's voice filled the room as his words continued. I felt uneasy, but then he said something that completely shook me. "You've raised Amy even though she's not your daughter, and for that, I'm deeply grateful. You've stood by my side all these years, but in doing so, you gave up your own dreams and never earned your own living. I take full responsibility for that because I let you live in comfort. When I'm gone, I worry that you'll struggle." "I'm not my mother's child," I blurted out, the realization hitting me hard. But then it clicked. Despite the lack of affection, she had taken care of me every day, doing what was necessary for a child who wasn't her own. "Who was this person?" I asked. "You never mentioned a marriage. You said you felt sorry for your sister, so you ended up supporting us, but that's all you did." "I'm sorry, but once I'm gone, I worry about your future. No one will be there to support you, and I fear that your life will be taken from you," my father continued. I sat in disbelief as his words kept coming, unexpectedly clear. It was all new to me, his concerns, his regrets, and his hopes for our future. That night, I struggled to process everything before confronting my mother the next day. "Mom, I watched the video from Dad yesterday. You know everything now," I began, a mixture of confusion and realization in my voice. "I raised you because I promised him I would, that's all," she admitted, the weight of untold truths heavy in her voice. "What happened to my biological mother?" I asked, seeking answers amid the chaos of newfound truths. "You were the child of my sister and your father," she replied. "She died shortly after giving birth to you. Your father was devastated, and he asked me to help raise you. I became your mother out of a promise." Her words explained everything, filling in the gaps I had always wondered about. My mother had sacrificed her own dreams to fulfill her promise to my father. I remembered how my mother had worked in a diner, full of energy and determination. Her dream had been to own her own diner, but when she took on the role of mother, that dream was put aside. However, inspired by my father's video and the memory of her forgotten dream, my mother made a bold decision. She was going to pursue it again. She was training to reopen her diner. "I should have done this sooner. Working is enjoyable, and it suits me," she confessed. "I had no idea, and I feel guilty for not knowing," I said. "It's not your fault, Amy. I made that choice. I'm just not good with kids, so I couldn't manage you well. I'm the one who made things difficult for you," she said, accepting her responsibility. As we talked, I realized this was the first time we had such an open conversation. At last, I felt like I understood my mother better. Our talks became more frequent, and we decided to use the money my father left behind to open her diner. Once she started working, my mother became more humble. She hesitated when the topic of funds for her business came up, something I would never have imagined not long ago. While I continued my regular job, I helped her with the diner. This brought us closer together, forging a bond between us that had never existed before. When it came to living expenses, she insisted on handling them herself, not accepting any help from my father's inheritance. "Promise me you'll tell me if you're struggling. Dad trusted me to take care of you," I urged. "I'll be fine. It doesn't cost much." But with the diner's expenses, she trailed off, her determination clear. "I'll support you. Of course, I'm looking forward to it. Do your best," I encouraged her, my heart full of pride. After all these years, we had finally become a real family, and now, we were living in harmony. She wasn't my biological mother, but perhaps it was the right time for me to learn the truth. "Your diner opens tomorrow. Your dream is finally coming true," I said, filled with pride as I watched her determination. "Watching you work so hard at the company reminded me of my own dreams when I was younger. That's why I've made it this far. It's all thanks to you and your father. Thank you so much, Mom," I said, my gratitude deep. "Promise me you'll always be my mom, Amy," she said, her voice full of sincerity. "From now on, let's get even closer. We only have each other," I replied, feeling a deep connection. After my father's passing, the truth came out, and I accepted our situation, deciding to live with just my mother and me. I considered moving back to my hometown and living with her again. I don't cook, So Mom worries about my diet and is encouraging me to come back, I explained, touched by her concern. My father would probably be surprised by how well we're getting along, his house, his business, and the inheritance he left. I'll protect them and continue to build a new family with my mother. I promised to honor my father's legacy, I vowed. We visited the graves of my father and my biological mother, my mother's older sister, to update them on our lives. After the adoption process, I was officially registered as my mother's daughter, forging a bond stronger than blood. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video. Stay stunned.